Hi, you've tuned in to Radio Northern Beaches, your Listen Local station, right here on the Northern Beaches of Sydney. You can find us on your radio dial at 88.7 and 90.3 FM. Can't get to a radio? No worries. You can always stream our program live from anywhere in the world at rnb.org.au. And for listening on your own schedule, our podcasts are available globally at rnbpodcast.com.au. So be sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Now, here is our latest podcast.
Hello again, listeners. Welcome to Community Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7, 90.3 FM streaming, www.rnb.org.au. It's live, of course, on the internet. Programs Innovation Talk. I'm Michael Lester. Needless to say, it's such a cliche, isn't it, that artificial intelligence is everywhere in our lives today, in all our devices and all our platforms, etc., etc. And the other remarkable thing about it, it seems to be just growing all around us at a great pace, raising all sorts of questions about opportunity and good impacts, but also confronting and challenging issues about how we can take best advantage by and minimizing the harms of all this technology. We're very pleased to welcome again to our program Professor Toby Walsh, the Professor of Artificial Intelligence and the Chief Scientist at the Artificial Intelligence Institute at the University of New South Wales. He's the author of many books as well as a prolific writer and researcher in the field. And in particular, too, just recently, he's published through Black Ink, publishes The Shortest History of AI. Welcome to our program, Toby.
Look, it's nice to be back.
Toby, this AI transformation and revolution has been a long time coming, decades in the making, as you document, but it does seem that at the moment we seem to be in the middle of a huge, almost boom, if not bubble, in what's going on, particularly on the money side with investment in artificial intelligence. After 4 decades, I believe, of your own personal involvement in artificial intelligence development and research, that the speed and scale of what's happening now is really quite mind-boggling. And I think you quote a figure of $1 billion a day that was invested in AI development, presumably in application, globally only in the past year, which is a huge number and represents, I think you say, 20% of global R&D investment. This is just absolutely enormous. But to what extent might this be the manifestation of a well-known phenomenon in technology and innovation, or what's called the hype cycle, that takes a long, long time for things to break, and then suddenly it breaks and you get hype, and you get huge bubbles and booms, and then they burst?
Yeah, I mean, there is a well-known phenomenon, and Gartner call it, the Gartner hype cycle, and the trough of disillusionment is no doubt waiting because we're at the peak of expectation at the moment. I think what's different is the technology is mature enough and capable enough that even if we do have a significant trough of disillusionment, as we did, for example, over the dot-com boom and bust, if we just roll out the technology more widely to more areas, that's still going to have a huge, great impact. So I'm not actually too worried. Obviously, people are going to be losing money on some of these very speculative investments, but that's always the case. But they're laying the infrastructure and the foundations for what will be significant. I mean, again, if you look at that analogy, look at what happened with the big dot-com boom and bust. A lot of people lost money, but actually all those speculative businesses that went bust at the time, we now do have online grocery stores that would deliver within the day or even the hour to you. We do have people selling pet food online. All of those businesses like pets.com and van.com, to prove to be too speculative in the dot-com boom, now are actually profitable businesses in their own right. And the same, I suspect, is going to be true with AI, even if people do lose a bit of money on some of the more speculative investments at the moment, that there is significant value to be had.
Like all these sorts of booms, I guess, it's manifest in part on the stock exchange, the stock market, and certainly lots of companies and whatever have been getting huge valuations and huge speculative, I'd guess, rises in their valuations. But an interesting aspect of what's going on here, I think, is that it's a lot of the biggest and richest companies in the world, the big tech companies, I guess you could say, are pouring billions of dollars of their money into developing and investing in new products. It seems to have got to a point even there, though, that there seem to be striking some limits to their ability to finance this further development, given that they can't seem to realize return. I hear that Zuckerberg at Meta is on the point of having blown billions, not getting much for his money, needing to think about cash flow that can't sustain his ongoing investment, needing to think about borrowing. And I believe this is a situation facing the other big tech companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Alpha.
It's a conscious business decision, which is to outspend the opposition to gain first mover advantage. And it's not clear to me that that is perhaps necessarily the wise, although there is some validity to that. There is money to be had. I mean, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, is actually the fastest growing company ever in any field of endeavor. Before ChatGPT was released, they had no products, they had no income. A year after it was released, at the end of 2023, 1 year after it was released, they had $1 billion a year annualized revenue. A year later, it was 2 billion, and now it's somewhere around $3 or $4 billion annualized revenue. We've actually never seen any company grow income that fast ever. No company's gone to $1 billion a year revenue in 1 year ever before. So there is significant returns to be had by the people, the winners. It's not clear that all the other competitors are necessarily going to be making such spectacular wins, but there is a lot in play here.
In previous technology booms and whatever's with other technologies, a phenomenon that we'd seen was that these big investing companies in technology and development often develop competing standards for their products and whatever. They go into competition, and then one may triumph and one may not. Is there an issue here of technical standards? For example, I was thinking in the past of Beta and VHS and the big battle that was fought and lost in the marketplace. All these companies that we're discussing now presumably are developing completely different and their own models, are they? To what extent is that a meaningful issue?
Well, interesting you should ask that, because actually there's a lot of companies now are using standardized API to the language models so that they can choose whoever happens to be the best or the cheapest or the most appropriate for their application, so they don't get locked into one person. But there is likely to be, and this has been the case in the tech sector in the past, monopolies will emerge. Monopolies will emerge because of the scarcity of data. Why is it that there's only one search engine, there's only one social media company, there's only relatively small number of messaging platforms? Is because there are significant scaling advantages, network effects that you get. You want everyone to be in the same social media platform. You want everyone to be on the same messaging platform so that you can message them. And if you're a search engine, you want everyone to be using your search engine. So you're collecting all that valuable information about what people are looking for. And that has been meant in the past that, there were no competitors to Google. And indeed, Google rather sat on its hands because, search hadn't really improved very much in the last almost 20 years. Indeed, search in some respects has gone backwards. A lot more advertisements, a lot more junk that comes your way. There wasn't any incentive for them to innovate because they did have a bit of a monopoly. And so you're seeing these large investments because each of these companies wants to be the monopoly provider of the future.
Is there any reason to believe that the different directions that these companies are taking in their actual research and development of new AI products, that they're developing what ultimately be sort of competitive products? Or are they, as perhaps is implied in some of what you were saying earlier, that really they're all competing very much for the same thing with the same sort of product at the end of the day?
They are. They're very much a commodity. Intelligence is a commodity. There's 8 billion intelligences around the world, and they're all actually pretty similar to each other when it comes down to it. But what makes them different? What makes the 8 billion intelligence on the planet different is that they're trained on different things and have different experiences, life experiences to draw upon. And that's going to be the same with the artificial intelligence. It's going to, the only competitive advantage is going to come down to your data. So you can see this already, that the tech companies are all trying to do deals with all the media companies, with the New York Times and with Nine Media to try and lock up that data. And similarly, within companies, if you want to focus on making good financial decisions, then you've got to go to, Reuters or Bloomberg. They're the only people who've got all that data. If you want to look at science, you've got to do a partnership with people like Elsevier or Springer. The people have got all the data on all the scientific knowledge on the planet. So that is where I suspect the competitive advantage is going to lie, with who has the high quality data.
We're talking here on Innovation Talk Radio Northern Beaches with Toby Walsh, AI professor at the AI Institute, University of New South Wales, and his recent book, too, that he's just published, The Shortest History of AI. Not only is there evidently what you might call an arms race between the tech companies going on in the terms we've discussed, but one might also say there's a geopolitical arms race, and particularly between US and China, but of course Europe's a player in there too. To what extent was the revelation that China seemed to be ahead of the game when it issued the DeepSeek model, if you like, which seemed by many to be a real game changer in terms of it was much cheaper, it was much more effective, it was more open access. To what extent was that a game-changing technological breakthrough, do you think?
I don't think it was a technological breakthrough, but it definitely was an eye-opener to many people. I was at the AI Action Summit in Paris, where J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, gave a much reported speech there. And DeepSeek was the talk of the summit because the lead that the US had assumed that they had, the 6-month or year lead that they thought they had on the rest of the world, clearly was not the case. And all the barriers that they've been trying to erect, try and stop the exports of, the AI GPU chips to China, proved to be futile. The Chinese were able to get hold of enough chips, even if they were not the first class, but the second class chip, then use their ingenuity. Indeed, I think necessity was the mother of invention. They had to be a bit more ingenious to be able to make it work with less, come up with very competitive straits. There may be, in the short term, AI winners of the AI race. Ultimately, it's going to be like electricity. Everyone wins. If you think about it, the whole planet won because we invented and applied electricity to our lives, and now it's everywhere. Every country uses electricity to power their homes, to power their factories, to power their offices, and also to communicate the data and power their computers and all the other things that we do with electricity. It wasn't just the Westinghouses and the Teslas who were the first movers in electricity back 100 or so years ago. It was all of us. And the same is going to be true of artificial intelligence. It's going to be a pervasive technology. You're not going to be able to keep the genie in the bottle. Everyone is going to ultimately have artificial intelligence that runs on all their different devices. And so it's something that we will all get to profit from. And I'm not sure it's that important to be the first mover. What's interesting with standards is that we didn't do a particularly good job with standards. Every country you go to has different voltage, different frequency, different shaped plugs.
That's true.
We didn't actually do a very good job of making international standards. And that was a simple task, right? You just have to decide the voltage and the frequency and the number of pins and shape of the pins on your plug. That wasn't much. I do think I do worry when people say, "Oh, we need to make international standards for AI." I think, well, good luck with that, because it's a much more complicated thing to try people to align on standards, and then to think that we're going to agree with the Chinese as to what the standards are in terms of invading our privacy and so on, or we're going to even agree with the Americans as to what we've got different values here in Australia than they do have in America. I always say to politicians, we should be looking to regulate AI at the level of the nation state. That's where you're going to have the most traction, most hope for actually getting something that aligns with our values.
One of the criteria for taking a look at the impact of technology and innovation, of course, is not so much the rate of development of ideas and maybe even products, but actually the rate of diffusion and adoption and impact in mainstream life, and particularly in businesses. And looking at the experience to date, some commentators have commented already that notwithstanding these huge investments in development, if you like, that there might have been, I think you even referred to a trough of disillusionment or a bit of a lull in AI, in the sense that some of the surveys seems to be showing that businesses across the economy that have been trying to take up AI have been finding it hard to get the returns they expected to justify their investments in their businesses. And in fact, now nearly half of businesses who adopted and invested in AI in their businesses in the past year have withdrawn those investments.
Yeah, it's not a technology that you can just plug and play. It's not like if you're a business and you decide you need a customer relationship management system to manage all your clients, you go out and you put it to tender, and there's a bunch of different systems, and if it meets the spec of the tender, then it's likely to work. AI is not like that. It's much more subtle. You've got to be much more agile about it. And you're going to expect a lot more projects to fail. Half the projects or more might well fail. And that you have to expect to happen. But equally, there will be certain projects that will succeed and they'll bring great value to you. Pointing out the value isn't just economic. I mean, there are places where you will see, doing work that humans used to do, and so you can save the money that you used to spend on those humans, maybe. But the value is often in, for example, improving the quality of what you do. Lifting the quality of your service or your product, preventive maintenance to make sure that your service doesn't go down as frequently as it used to. Or one of the biggest ones is actually in terms of safety, in terms of making your business operations more safe. And you see this certainly in areas like, for example, the mining industry here in Australia. The automation that we've introduced into the mines in the last couple of decades has had a huge, great positive. It used to be over 300 people would die every year in mining accidents. Last year it was 3 dozen. That's, of course, 3 dozen too many. But it's a tenth of what it was because we've literally got people out of the coalface and we've got machines, automated machinery doing that work instead now.
All new technologies, when they're introduced in society, offer the challenge of balancing the potential benefits against the potential harms. And this involves a whole lot of social, moral, ethical, and political issues about how to strike the balance, particularly through regulatory and incentive systems within there. And many countries, as we know, are now grappling with this, including here in Australia, and the EU is putting in place controls. But interestingly enough, President Trump has decided that the path to make America great again and taking leadership, particularly over the Chinese, is to deregulate everything, including AI. What sort of impact is that sort of strategy, in the case of AI, going to have on the development and the nature of the development of AI in America and therefore globally?
It's very troubling. Again, I go back to I was in Paris where everyone got together and it became very clear to remove all the shackles and to go hell for leather to win share. What happened, for example, in the first industrial, I think if we look at the history of previous revolutions, doing it in an unregulated way, as the US administration, the new US administration is promoting, is going to be very problematic. It was only because we introduced significant regulation in terms of the collective bargaining that unions were able to bring to bear, labor laws, and then the other structures, the welfare state, universal education, so people educated for the jobs. It was only by making significant intervention in policy and from government that we were able to make sure that the Industrial Revolution was one in which the profits didn't just go to the people who own the means of production, but were actually shared around quite well. And I think if we're not careful, we will see the same happening again. We will see a concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, and we will see, I remember we used to describe them as the robber barons because of their bad behaviors. I would see, the tech giants being the new robber barons in the digital space.
Well, I think President Trump even speaks about wanting to go hark back to the great days of the Gilded Age, but that's another story. He certainly loves the guild around the White House and the chairs he sits in. But if we could move on a slightly different gear when it comes on the regulation front, I want to speak about what I think you may have called, or others have called, the transformation of warfare, or the third revolution in warfare, with the development of autonomous weapons, and where we're at with that, the nature of the risk, but also what might be done, because it seems to be a sad fact, particularly in the international domain of regulation on warfare, that these regulations are only put in place and tried to, after all the damage has been wreaked and the horror has been experienced. I'm thinking particularly post the First World War, when international conventions and treaties for humanitarian and other reasons were put in for the rules of war in 1925 for chemical and biological weapons. What's the nature of the threat and harm that we're seeing already, for example, even in the field in Ukraine, I believe, of autonomous weapons and their development?
Yes, it is the third revolution in warfare, the first being the invention of gunpowder, the second being the invention of nuclear weapons at war, and we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment another step change in the way that war is fought, what with increasing the autonomous AI-powered drones. that is completely transforming the way about warfare. Yes, that is, you're right. Not regulated new technologies preemptively. We've only regulated after the effect, after we've seen the horror of that technology being used on the battlefield. There is one that was regulated before it was actually deployed. We have sometimes. The thing that worries me most actually is that we will see increasingly these AI powered weapons being used on our TV screens, and we will decide that it's rather repugnant. The UN is working on this issue. There have been, numerous meetings at the United Nations on this topic. The Secretary General has advocated. Nobel Peace Laureates have called for it. Church faith leaders, and indeed, when you survey the public, a large section of the public are for the idea that we should regulate these technologies. But unfortunately, there are a few major players, the United States, Russia, China, the obvious players, who are holding back from actually the discussions ongoing at the UN coming to any sort of consensus. So I can see actually some nation states actually going on unilaterally making some regulation, as they did, for example, with cluster munitions. So I keep my fingers crossed that we will come to a point where we do decide that this is another weapon of mass destruction, and that we should regulate it like we've regulated other weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons. All of those other weapons of mass destruction have been regulated, and these will be a weapon of mass destruction. Because the thing that we know about computers is that they could do something once, you put a loop around it, they can do it 1,000 times or 10,000 times. So these will allow you to industrialize, to scale warfare in a way that only compares to other weapons of mass destruction.
The way it's transforming it has such a powerful sense in itself that must be attractive in many ways to countries looking at their defense. They can cut down the number of soldiers they've got to put into the field. Although I believe now, you give the example that the US Air Force has got more drone pilots than it has airplane pilots.
Yes.
But you don't need to put people in the field. We can see in Ukraine that these autonomous drones not only can they take out conventional weapons like really expensive tanks, including Australian tanks that have been shipped over there. A $10,000 drone can take down a few $100,000 tank. And so it goes with our nuclear submarines, which can be overtaken very shortly by small drone-powered submarines. It just goes on and on. It's a very powerful dynamic to resist for those who are interested in warfare, isn't it?
It is a powerful dynamic, and you're right. The tank has become actually rather useless in Ukraine because of the power, the all-seeing nature of those drones that can direct artillery or even direct their own munitions onto the tanks. So tanks have actually not been very useful at all. And that is the very troubling aspect of this weapon, because it's going to completely change the balance of power. It used to be that, it was the big boys, it was the superpowers, the countries that had the wealth to invest in the expensive platforms, whether they be battlefield tanks or the aircraft carriers or the expensive, fifth generation fighters. You used to have to, be a superpower to be able to afford a decent weight of these platforms, and now you don't. You just need an off-the-shelf drone. So the sophistication comes from the AI, and that, of course, might be software that you hacked from someone else. So it's going to be very destabilizing to the balance of power. And we're already seeing this. We're already seeing the balance of power shifting quite radically. Countries like Turkey and Iraq are becoming major military powers in their own regions because they've been developing drone technologies. They've been developing these autonomous technologies, and they doesn't take the wealth of the United States to be able to do that. Turkey just launched its first drone carrier, and not an aircraft carrier, a drone carrier. And this is we've actually brought this upon ourselves because they've put export restrictions. Turkey tried to buy US drones and they were told they couldn't. Iraq, of course, are not allowed to buy US drones. So they've been able to develop their own. And it's a technology that they have been able to develop their own.
Yeah, well, of course, as we wrap up here on Innovation Talk, Radio Northern Beaches with our guest, Toby Walsh, Professor of AI at Uni New South Wales and author of his latest book, The Shortest History of AI. speaking about the international treaties and possible conventions that might, exercise some sort of restraint from a moral and humanitarian point of view, I think you may have been quoted as saying something powerful but obvious too, like you can't hold machines to account through laws, you can only hold people to account. And yet we're all confronting these issues right now. Australia is developing, with public money, these sorts of autonomous weapons and drones. We're shipping them to countries overseas for use in theatres of war. Our own ADF, of course, is investing hugely in these things. On the other hand, Australia historically, in the UN and particularly the conventions on biological and chemical warfare, and what was a real leader. What sort of role are we playing in trying to move towards these international treaties and conventions?
Sadly, we're not playing the sort of role that we should be, because, as you point out, we have a responsibility as a developer of some of these technologies, and we have a good history of being able to lead the world to useful regulation in disarmament space. We actually have a quite a good position because we're not a member of NATO, but we work closely with other members of NATO. So we have taken good leadership in terms of chemical weapons disarmament and so on in the past, and I would like us to actually to do more in that space, because I think we do have a responsibility as someone who develops. I mean, it's worth pointing out, it's not a completely black and white issue. There are, the technologies are going to bring very many positive applications in the military and other spaces. In the military space, for example, I have colleagues that are working on autonomous AI-powered mine clearing robots. Perfect job for a robot. You don't, if it goes wrong, the robot gets blown up, go and buy yourself another robot. A wonderful example of how you can actually, in the military setting, save lives by using these technologies. Equally, handing over the decision as to who lives and who dies to a machine, I think, crosses a moral red line, takes us to a deep, dark place, is going to transform the nature of warfare, and not in a good way. And one where, I think it's important that we try and set the standards, just as we set the standards, we set them, the very first regulation around technology in the military over 100 years ago with mines and dum-dum bullets and various other things that we decided were repugnant and unnecessarily harmful and ways to kill people, and that would inflict too much damage on civilians, for example, with mines, that we decided to regulate those things. And I think we need to do the same here with AI-powered weapons.
Yeah, well, staying closer to home here in Australia and talking about Australian leadership in some of these sort of spaces, I believe that the institute that you're involved with, the AI Institute in New South Wales, was launched 2.5 years ago, and I think it must have been a bit of a first around the place. And I noticed that only just recently the university signed, I think, what again seems to be a bit of path-breaking positive step, where it signed a huge contract, I believe, with OpenAI to basically apply AI throughout all its faculties and disciplines and in teaching and research. These are big, bold steps, aren't they? Are generally being well greeted.
Yes, I mean, universities are going to have to embrace this future. AI is going to transform the way we go about education, and it's going to transform the way we go about science. And universities are about those two things, about discovering new knowledge and about educating, the leaders of the future. And AI offers great promise to, improve what we can do in those spaces, and not just to, when we're not talking about just replacing tutors, we're talking about being able to do things that humans couldn't possibly do in the past, to be able to look at data sets and find signals in data sets that humans don't have the attention span or ability to look at, to discover new drugs, to discover new materials, to make new solar cells, as well as to provide tools to educate people and improve the quality of the education that we are able to give to people.
Well, thank you very much, Toby Walsh, Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the AI Institute at the University of New South Wales. It's always fascinating to talk with you, Toby, given your long experience and deep knowledge, not only of the technicalities of the development of artificial intelligence, but also the challenging issues it poses for morality and regulation, as we've heard. And your book, The Shortest History of AI, a good potted summary of where we've been and where we might be going. Thanks for joining us yet again on Radio Northern Beaches, Toby.
It's always a pleasure, Michael.
Australia, the lucky country. We've got meat pies. We've got the world's best beer. But most importantly, top of the list, we've got Radio Northern Beaches 88.7, 90.3. Now hitting the entire world on www.rmb.org.au.